think now, there we go. Okay, we are recording. So. Okay, I'm going to switch over to sharing my screen and we will get started with this. Come on. Go. Okay. Right now, I have, here we go. Got to check the waiting room one more time here. 34, all right. Okay, Kevin, if it's all right with you, I am going to make you a host. If you don't mind watching the waiting room and maybe the chat, because I'll be going back and forth, so I may not get to everything immediately. Is that all right with you?
That's fine with me. Be happy to do that.
All right. Yes. Okay, there we go. You should have that ready now. Oops. Let me back up here. That's not where we were going yet. Okay. We'll leave it on there. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I hope your first day or so of classes has been going well. So understand all of you are graduate students in the physical therapy program. Is there anybody who got in here who is not, besides Risa and Kevin?
I'm PT faculty.
Okay, well, welcome.
Thanks.
I'm also PT faculty.
Okay, we have a few PT faculty in here too. Good deal. Okay, what if you got into the waiting room a little bit after, like I said, when you're not asking a question or saying something directly, if you can mute your audio so it cuts down on the feedback, and then this is recording, so if you don't want your face to show up, because we're going to post this on the website, then you may want to axe your video out too. There you go. All right, just move back quickly. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is how people generally respond to change, and then some of the effects that change has, because we are experiencing a whole lot of it right now in the United States and in the world. When I first put this presentation together with Charlotte Strickland, who is in university training, we were doing this to primarily address the pandemic. I realized just over the last several days, we've added in some very unfortunate other events that I wish we'd been able to resolve earlier. So one of the big things about life that I have learned in my several decades of living on the planet and in working as a psychologist is that change is something that inevitably happens, and no matter what we do, it's not going to stop. This is one of my favorite lyrics that I discovered back when I was in college. Life is what happens when you're making other plans, and that's combining that with the ability to learn to adapt to that is just kind of a good life philosophy, in my opinion. So, because we were all making other plans, I think, before early this winter when this whole thing started to happen. By the way, is there anybody out there who does not know who John Lennon is? Okay, no takers. I learned not to assume that a few years ago. And that's when I realized I'm getting kind of old. Okay, so if you think about how you have adjusted to the events of the last few months or another time in your life when things change suddenly, for example, it might be for a lot of you when you started your graduate program or when you started college, if you moved far away. that's a big change. And the last few months have certainly been a big change. We all have kind of a typical way of responding to the world. That's called the basic definition of our personality. Well, it turns out we also have a particular way of responding to change. And a man named Richard Lukey, I hope that's how you pronounce his name. I've never actually heard it pronounced. Created an inventory. He is a social worker, but also in the business world. He's a writer and an editor. And fun fact, at least it was to me, he also plays acoustic guitar in the folk group O'Carolan, etc. So I like Irish music. Anyway, he put this inventory together that you can, if you have the funds or you work for an organization that wants to do this, you can take it and determine what your change style is. We elected that not to do that for the purposes of this presentation. But when I show you the different change styles, you may be able to kind of figure out where you fall in it anyway. So basically that preferred style in initiating and dealing with change, it's often influenced by the rest of our personality. So if you are more structured, like things to be predictable, you are probably going to respond to change differently than if you are more go with the flow, impulsive kind of thing. So, and the change style indicator is just, it's a way of assessing that change, just like there's a lot of inventories out there that assess your personality as a whole. Myers-Briggs type indicator, if you've ever taken that one, for example. Okay, a couple things to keep in mind when we're talking about the change styles. Change styles are an explanation of your preferred change style, and it does offer an appreciation for the different styles of change, that not change style. Not everybody responds to life in the same way. Not everybody responds to change in the same way. What change styles are not is an indication of right or wrong. There is not one style that is necessarily better than another. Just like if you think about another personality trait such as introversion, extroversion, they simply are different. And some may work better in certain situations than others, but that doesn't mean there's a right or wrong. They are not a measure of your competence in handling change. Having one style doesn't mean you're going to be more successful at handling change than another. So keep that in mind. And it's not, as is anything else in personality, a guarantee that you are going to respond a certain way to change. Our personalities, like I said, they are a pattern, but that doesn't mean that it's determined how you are going to react to and think about and feel about everything. So it may give you kind of a framework for what may well have been happening as we've gone on in the past couple of months, but it doesn't mean that in the future you would respond in the exact same way if the circumstances are a little bit different or even the same. So keep that in mind. All right, so these are the 3 basic change styles that come out of that inventory. And you can think about kind of how you might fit in these as I go over them. So the first style, these are people known as conservers. These are people who generally accept the current structure. If you're talking about, say, remember this came out of corporate, so if you're talking about an organizational structure. So for example, you may accept the current structure of your graduate program, or what would be something else? If you happen to play music or on a sports team or something, the structure of that group. So you're generally good with the way things are. In fact, you prefer, if change is going to happen, that it happen in small amounts. You kind of like to get used to things before there's a sudden change. I'll give you an example of this. When my daughter was very young, she's now a teenager, but back when she was very young, she was what they described in temperaments as slow to warm up. She liked to get the lay of the land before she did something. So the first time I took her to a tumbling class over at Sunshine Academy, she sat for the first month and watched everybody else. And I just accepted that I was paying for her to sit and watch. And about 3 weeks in, the instructor was able to come over and talk to her a little bit more. And I knew the day she handed him her security blanket that we were going to be good and she was going to be involved for the rest of the summer, and she was. So back then, she preferred change that was incremental. She's changed a bit since then. Then you have the pragmatists. These are the people that like to explore the structure. Yep. They kind of want to get the lay of the land before they decide which way to go, but they are okay with things moving. They prefer change that is functional. They are, by definition, the pragmatists. So they're going to look at what do we get out of this? What use is it going to be? Kind of what are the results and how does this work for everybody? And then you have the originators. These are the folks that approach change. They may be more responsive to it. They challenge the structure. They like it. They're the ones who want to come in with the big ideas. They're perfectly fine if you scrap what you had before and go forward. They may be seen as either impulsive or as visionary, kind of depending. So like the conservatives may be seen as cautious or sensible, kind of depending on where it is. And like I said before, there's no right or wrong, so all of these can work in here. But this may help explain why you might seem like you're feeling or thinking differently about everything that's gone on than somebody else that you know has. Another family member, my husband, I think he is more of an originator when it comes to change. He will challenge, he will ask why. He will go ahead and just try something, fiddle around with it until he gets it right. So, and go from there. Okay, your preferences as far as change style. And again, if you know anything about general personality, it tends to go on a continuum. So back to the idea of introversion, extroversion. There are some people who are very much introverts, some who are very much extroverts, and then others who are kind of in the middle. That happens with these styles too. So you may be thinking, well, you know, in most circumstances, I like to keep things as they were, but then in this, I'm fine if it changes. And that's how these things can work. So conservers, they like to keep the current structure working smoothly. They tend to focus on harmony and relationships, and they would prefer to take a look and say, well, this is working, so let's just maybe expand on that. We don't need to change the whole thing. Whereas the pragmatists, they're kind of the diplomats. Let's figure out what the shared objectives are, what's going to work for everybody. They're focused more on the results of things. What's this going to look at? What will this look like? And they'll look at the current circumstances and go, okay, what's working, what's not? So what do we need to do that's going to be effective for everybody? So, and then the originators, they will challenge. They are focused on what is the end goal and are very much into exploring the new possibilities of what could we do if we did this. So all of these are valuable. Like I said, you have a variety of people, and in any situation where you're working with a lot of different people, each of these can be beneficial in their own way. All right, do I have any comments or questions on that before I kind of shift gears?
And Susan, we could write in our questions, right, in the chat for you?
Yes, although Kevin will have to, yes, people can write in the chat. Kevin may have to keep an eye on when there is a chat, so I know there's a question to be answered. Okay, so now I'm going to start to shift into the other part of this. So this, hopefully, as I've been talking, you kind of get an idea of where you may fall in terms of your change style. Now, one of the things that happens, of course, with when things are changing, which is the other half of this presentation, for all of us to some degree, it tends to provoke some anxiety. And there's a very good reason for that, because anxiety, biologically, that is our warning system. It tells us you need to take a look at that and see if you might need to do something about it, because that's a very old part of our brain. If you think about the brain, you have kind of the lower brain, which is for the basic functions and survival, the midbrain, which is the feelings, and then the frontal cortex part, which makes us human. And that's what gives us logical, hypothetical thinking and kind of allows us to help regulate all the other stuff. Well, the old brain with anxiety, that's back from the days when we were still living in caves and figuring out how to make fire, and a lot of our world was threatening. And so our brain learned to do a little threat assessment every time it encountered something new. Change involves new. So there's a little bit of your brain that'll go, whoa, wait a minute, threat assessment before we go further. Some people take longer to assess their threat than others. That's okay. But that is why anxiety is a part of change. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. Your brain and your body are functioning like they're supposed to up to a point. And that's part of what we talk about, is when the anxiety is in overdrive. But that is just what's supposed to happen. And this is whether it's a good change, like if you know, when you got into college or you got into the PT program here and you moved, or you know, when you go out to field placement, you're about to head out to a job, get married, have a child, positive things, but they're still stressful and they still provoke anxiety because they involve change and they involve newness and they're not automatic. So. All right, now one thing to keep in mind, anxiety is something that happens to us. It is not something that you have to let run the whole show. This is a quote. You can find other people who have said something about this in some way. Epictetus is a Greek philosopher who commented on perception and what's going on in the world. Happened to like Jack Sparrow, so this is the one I threw out there. The problem is not the problem. The problem is your attitude about the problem. Okay, now, some things are very much real problems. What we have going on in the world right now, very much are real problems. So why'd I bring up Jack Sparrow and his attitude? Oops. Okay, because particularly when there's a lot of change and it is change that we can't seem to do a lot about, we can get overwhelmed. And so much has been happening lately that it's pretty understandable that people get overwhelmed. So what can you do to manage the anxiety instead of having it manage you? Well, one thing you can do, goes back to Jack Sparrow, is you can manage your thinking about it. Your perspective on the problem or whatever is going on can make a big difference in terms of how you feel. In counseling, we have something that comes out of the cognitive field called absolute thinking. And that's if you catch the language going on in your head involving words like should not, have to, cannot, must not, ought not, and one of my favorites, cannot stand. If you think about this, I cannot stand all the changes going on. I cannot stand being in quarantine. Think about what kind of feeling that leads to, probably a fairly strong one. Whereas if you can go back and change your perspective to, I would really prefer not but, I can't do something about that right now. So I'm going to manage this way. The prefer not goes with a less extreme feeling than cannot stand. And by the way, you not being able to stand something at all is, if you're able to think that, you in fact are dealing with it, because if you truly could not stand it, you would implode, explode something. You wouldn't be here anymore. So you can manage your thinking. You can try and get away from the absolute thinking. Or when I used to work with kids, I'd tell them, refer to them as your ants, automatic negative thoughts, and you squash your ants. That helped them remember that. Another thing to do with your thinking is try and figure out what situations you do have control over and what you don't. And you try and work on the things you can affect change on, and then try not to worry about the rest of it. So. Okay, what's another thing you can do? Manage your actions. There's something, again, in counseling, we call it emotion-driven behavior, which actually I think is just a fancy word for impulsivity. But if you think about a time that you were really excited or really upset and you did something in response to that strong feeling, that may or may not have been a good idea when you stopped and slowed down and thought about it. So if you can change the thinking, you may also be able to manage your actions. So a few things to try and do through all of this that won't necessarily, create world peace or make the virus go away, but may help you to feel less overwhelmed. And I did it like this, so it makes an acronym, which again may make it easier to remember. So it's GRABS. But gratitude is just trying to find little things that are working for you, or that make you happy, or that you appreciate in your life. This is not the same as necessarily saying, oh, I shouldn't feel bad at all. Somebody else has it much worse than me. You don't need to invalidate your feeling that way. This is just saying, okay, this is a really awful situation right now, but I do have these things. If my health is okay, that's a good thing. If the sun was shining today, that's a good thing. We had some beautiful spring days, unusually cool spring. That was kind of a good thing. So things to appreciate that are working in your life. Another thing that's very important when there is a whole lot of change going on, and this goes kind of the next point, this will figure out individually how this works. A routine. A lot of people and places have talked about routines are important when everything goes upside down like it has. That includes getting enough sleep, getting proper nutrition, getting physical activity, trying to structure your day if that's something that's really valuable to you. I've talked to, and I don't know how many of you have done this with classes when they went online, but a lot of people I've talked to working as far as having to work from home, trying to set up something of a work day where you set a space, where you walked into that space at a certain time, you left that space at a certain time, that kind of thing. So you have a routine. Helps you keep track of what day it is, and just helps your brain kind of get some relief from having to do that threat assessment all the time. Another one, attitude. Again, your attitude about the problem, but more specifically here, humor. There's two natural stress relievers that we know about for people that are very important. One of those actually is physical activity. That doesn't necessarily mean formal exercise. It can. But physical activity is a very good stress reliever. It helps with the cortisol and all that stuff that builds up, that helps work that through. And if you're going to worry, you might as well do it while you're in motion. The other one we know of is humor. That is a natural stress reliever. Even though it's sometimes what we might call gallows humor, you're laughing at something that you're like, oh my gosh, that's really not that funny. But if you don't do that, you're going to cry. Sort of thing. But being able to find something that amuses you is good. breathing, having time for relaxation. And that's something to do whether you're feeling anxious or not, to have your downtime in a time where you can just be. We're not very good at that in American society, and we're really not very good at it when we are in graduate school. I remember that. But it's good to have there. But also when you're getting anxious, again, thinking back to the way the brain works, the two types of nervous system, sympathetic, parasympathetic. The parasympathetic calms things down. One of the best ways to activate that system is slow, regular breathing, which you may already know from your PT training. Okay, and the last one, social support. And that has been hard when we have not been able to interact with people the way many of us like to, but to have some sort of connection, people you communicate with on a regular basis in some fashion, that is also helpful as far as navigating anxiety and kind of getting through these times. Okay, so making your change style work for you. Back to what I was just talking about. One thing is kind of accepting that once you know kind of who you are and how you respond to change most of the time, okay, so some things may be more difficult for me than others. If you are a conserver, a lot of change all at once may be more difficult for you. If you are originator, then change going along slowly may be harder for you. So you adjust accordingly. But for example, if you know that you are more of a conserver, then having that routine for you may be really important to establish. Whereas for somebody who's a pragmatist or an originator, it may not be as critical, but it can certainly be useful. So personality style, for example, introversion, extroversion. Introverts may not need as much social interaction. That doesn't mean they don't need any support. They just tend to have a quieter, smaller circle with that. So if you kind of know what your change style is, that may help you to figure out what works. If you're trying to solve problems with people, to figure out how you tend to like to do it, but understand that other people are going to be kind of different in that. Okay, if you're wondering why I just went through the whole thing in 30 minutes, that was deliberate, because at this point, what I want to do is give people the chance to ask questions, share things, talk about anything you might want to talk about, whether it's specifically related to COVID, other stuff going on, your graduate program, what have you. So this is the point at which people can go ahead and unmute. Anything in chat?
I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
This is Leah Lowe. So when I was looking at the change styles or looking at the way I may approach change,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that varies for me in the different areas where I may or may feel more confident, about my ability to handle those things. So I guess, is it possible for me to have one style in one arena of my life and have a completely different style in other places? And how do you best manage kind of adapting between those adaptability styles?
Okay, no, that is a very good question, Leah. And yes, I think it is quite possible, like personality as a whole, and that's like oftentimes what we call the state trait. That's kind of a controversy in personality psychology. But the fact of the matter is that personalities are patterns, not concrete rule books. So we do adjust depending on the circumstances at times. And so again, I think that's where you adapt to recognize that I may in fact end up being more of say, an originator if needed, when most of the time I'm a pragmatist or even a conserver. And it probably is, the more unusual the circumstances, the more change you may see in what you're thinking and doing. So, and I think lost my train of thought there. I think you learn as you, some of it's going to be experience. And like you said, confidence, that's where I was going. You probably are more likely to stick to your change style when you're confident in it and confident that it's going to work for you under the circumstances. You may try something else if you're feeling less confident. But confidence and competence are also things that I think largely come with experience. So you have to be willing to risk and try things for that to happen.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Susan, this is Kevin Garrison. And
Yes.
I was wondering, well, maybe people are thinking of questions, and I just want to encourage them to speak up. They do have some. Maybe you could speak to some of the resources, further resources that are available to the students at UCA through the Counseling Center.
Yes. Okay. And by the way, I will go to the next slide here. You can see that the change style indicator, if you wanted to know more about that, is available there. Charlotte provided that resource. This resource, and then I'll talk about the Counseling Center and other things in general. A lot of the information I put up, this is a group, the Wellness Society, that consolidated a lot of this really nicely. And they put it together for the coronavirus stuff that we're all going through, but it's also applicable to a lot of other things going on. So that is one resource. So what do we have here? A lot of things changed in terms of how services are provided, academic and the student services side of things. Counseling Center, we are still operational. We started out with phone, and then one of our big change challenges was to get teletherapy up and running in a hurry. So right now what we're doing is the usual counseling services, mostly individual, although we will, I think, get back to some of the other ones doing this as we go. We now offer over video in addition to the phone, and you can get on our website and get information on that, or just call if you get to a point where you feel like your usual support system is not working and you want to access us. We also try and provide other resources and information if you just want to kind of go the self-education route as far as finding some things that might be helpful. And we also kind of keep an eye out. We'll also be partnering with the SGA, Student Government Association, to do a couple other workshops over the course of the summer. And then, like more of a support group discussion style thing as well. Risa, you want to throw anything in there?
Not really, except, again, one of the other things we do is if all of the things we're teaching people doesn't work, medication is also an option. We work really well with student health services and have a psychiatrist on staff that can assist with folks who have suffered from anxiety for a long time. Short. The other thing I want to add, I'm glad you asked me to speak, and I'm glad people have stayed, is, oh my gosh, stress levels seem to have gone up terribly this past week. Even as staff, I'm feeling that. And I'm a pragmatist. How are the rest of you all doing? And you could put it in chat or just speak out. That would be great if you could speak out. How's everybody feeling? You can also type it in. Kevin, how you feeling? Okay, you guys are way too quiet.
Yeah, is this are you usually this quiet?
Well, here I'm stressed at trying to operate Zoom on my iPad. So my
Oh,
computer, and so I can't find the right button to push to operate my Zoom. So I think it's just that's kind of a little bit of a lesson in just how things are changing, and then you even think you've got things figured out, and a way that things can work for you, and then something else comes along. So it is challenging. And just Risa, just to kind of maybe to answer your question in the context of just the events and things that are going on in our country over this past weekend, that's personally that's weighing on me a lot, and on my mind a lot, and have had conversations with even some of our students about that, and I know that's on their minds as well.
Mm-hmm. It seems that, and again, I see someone saying again, difficult to adapt to the way in which I have to address work and home life. Yes, seem to have combined. But it seems like the pandemic has been put on hold because, again, we have protests and we have rioting. And again, it's the same thing with the pandemic. You don't know how it's going to go. And with the protests and rioting, you don't know how it's going to go. What are the thoughts about other folks about protests and riots right now? I used to teach class like everybody else. I could just call on somebody. Okay, let's see. Haley, are you there? Oh, I got someone. Aaron. Oh, I see Aaron. I see your name. I was going to call on you, Aaron, if you didn't, but you did. Aaron is saying it's been stressful trying to find a new normal for the next little while, whether it be studying, being with loved ones, etc. And Schaefer said this past week has been very emotionally challenging and draining, worried about this nonstop in addition to COVID and transitioning to online classes. Yeah, 3 major changes going on. Absolutely. Anybody move in from another state? And thank you, both of you and all of you, for responding. How many out-of-staters do you have, Kevin?
So everyone, well, that's a great question. Everyone has at least been in the program since last fall, and so they would be in residence.
Okay.
But we've scattered. So when classes were canceled in the fall, I know a number of people returned home, and so we have people in Oklahoma, we have people in Texas. Mississippi that I'm aware of. Some of them have returned, for the summer. Some will not be returning. We've got one that's international actually.
Wow.
So some will be returning later.
Okay. And nobody has to be quarantined, right?
Well, we will have to deal with that. Any international ones that come back.
Okay.
So we're prepared for that.
Mm-hmm. And they also are. They're working on a plan. The hope is that we open up back to face-to-face in the fall, but they also have a plan for an area where students can quarantine and still be on campus rather than having to go home again if that's really, if they're not very close, which is going to probably be more the case for graduate students a lot of times. And when somebody commented on the, like, just seems like we've had one thing after another this year. And anxiety is one of the main things that comes up, but after a while, and I know I've been feeling this, so many of you may have too, is exhaustion sets in. And that again is we're designed to deal with stress effectively for a short period of time, but not have a huge amount of it for a long period of time. So we go up and then we kind of plateau and then we start to go down the other side, which doesn't feel that great. And that's another thing I wanted to make sure people are aware. This sort of goes into the next presentation I do as well. But it's actually okay to not be that okay. And I know that's hard. Graduate students tend to be high achieving and their bar is higher. And so not a lot of us like to admit that when we're struggling, which is ironic for those of us in helping professionals, in helping professions. We need to work on the self-care as much as we work on the care of others. That's going to be an important thing to keep in mind as you all go through, whether you're dealing with normal circumstances or these circumstances. You don't have to have all the bells and whistles right now.
Which Susan brings up a good point. As we work in counseling, a couple of PT students, oh my gosh, along with nursing students, you tend to be highly stressed. You also tend to have that personality that is wonderful for your job. You can do a lot. You're highly capable. But that also, I think, puts you with a personality that can get stressed because sometimes you take on so much, you don't take time for yourself. I see that Tori is in Texas and Rebecca is in Louisiana and Aaron is going back and forth from Shreveport. So Tori, how is it in Texas regarding protests and dealing with the pandemic?
Oh, well, I'm from Texas, but I'm still in Conway because I'm still working in Little Rock on the weekends.
Okay.
So how is it being, so it's hard, it can be hard to be away from here if you're at home, but then it can be hard to be away from home if you're here, if you're worried about people. So how are you with that?
I think I'm doing okay. My roommate moved out right as right around spring break, so right around whenever we shut down. So I've adjusted to living by myself in Conway. And I think I'm doing a pretty good job of like staying in connection with family and friends so I don't feel as lonely, but living alone has been an adjustment.
Yeah.
I don't think I could manage living alone. You're talking to myself all the time. Rebecca, you're in LA, Louisiana currently. How's it going there?
Well, currently I live in the country, so there's not much excitement over here.
And country folks don't have to worry as much as wearing a mask because you're already distanced, right?
Yes.
Okay. And I put a question out there. What are some of the things you guys are doing to deal with the change and with the stress that comes with change and with just not knowing? I'm eating a lot. I have also done that thing where I'm over controlling the things I can control and just forgetting everything else. By that I mean I have cleaned and cleaned and cleaned. Okay, Kevin. Kevin's saying that one of the advantage of the PT program is your cohort. You guys tend to get close and support each other. And hopefully everybody likes each other. Kevin, you got a quiet group. You know that, right? exercising every day. That is fantastic.
Mhm.
Oh, and Rebecca's cooking and crafts. So, okay, if anybody wants to know who the cook is, that's Rebecca. And Erin might need an exercise buddy. And Courtney, yes, cleaning is absolutely wonderful for taking your mind off things. And puzzles are fantastic too.
I actually
Okay.
finally fixed up my front flower beds
Okay,
because they've
gardening.
been raggedy for, a couple years.
Ah, Tiffany is golfing. Okay, so guys, I want you to look at this. These are people you connect with. Long walks. Oh, puppy. Courtney, what kind of puppy do you have? Golden Retriever. Nice. Okay. And Tiffany bakes and golfs. Look at that. So Morgan, all you had to put long walks. Yeah, long walks on the beach. We don't have a beach, but we can work on that.
Unless you can find a small one at a lake.
We can find one with lots of sand. Justin, you fish. Our family and trying to cook more. Yay! All right. Males who cook are wonderful. So I do not. Justin, do you catch anything when you fish?
I've caught a few fish. I've caught some brim and bass, but the first couple of days that I went, I didn't catch anything. And so I've mainly just been learning like the technicalities behind fishing. So it's
There
good
isn't,
experience.
Justin, there is no technicality behind fishing. You just throw it, you reel it in, right?
I
Oh,
mean,
no, yes. No, there's a lot of technicality behind fishing.
what happens when you throw your line and your line breaks? You have to tie your hook, put
Oh,
a weight on.
that means you're just a bad caster. Just go cut the branch off. Where are you fishing, Justin?
It's a dam called Chi
Where?
in Louisiana. It's about 20 minutes outside of Winfield, Louisiana, which is where I stay
So you're in Louisiana. Okay.
now.
Fishing brim. Okay.
Just whatever I can catch, basically.
Okay. All
Yeah,
right. And you're trying to cook more. Okay. And when you say family, is that married, children?
no, ma'am, my parents. I'm back home staying with my
Okay.
parents for the time being.
Yeah, see, Justin, I'm older and married. I'm just trying to fix you up with somebody here.
I have someone as of now, so hey.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Forget Justin, y'all, okay? Okay. So you guys have all met, right? You guys know each other. Yes?
Well, I think we have 2 classes in here, first years and second years, if I remember correctly.
Okay. Okay. All righty. And anything else someone's doing that you want to share that's helping you? Animals are wonderful to have. They're a wonderful stress reliever if you can have them. They're great.
Another thing I'll mention is that, like, for some people, they really like having information and making plans and that sort of thing. And another thing that shows up a lot when we're going through stuff like this is, how much should you be paying attention to the media? And you kind of figure out what works for you for that. But keep in mind that the media is designed, because this is how they get your attention and keep you going, to pull at your emotions. And, they've learned that our brains like extremes. So that's why the headlines oftentimes read as they do. So figure out for yourself how much it's helpful for you to know and look at, and how much it's not, and try and get a balance there with that. And then, maybe the fun stuff. And some people have found it fun to watch Outbreak and Contagion, and other people prefer to, watch Disney and stay completely away from it. I understand Tiger King has been very popular. So, and then reading things and that sort of stuff. But yeah, you kind of figure out how much to take in and how much to leave.
Kevin sent a request. Can you speak to information overload? Okay, which is what you just spoke about, Susan, is information overload.
Yes, it can, really can feel like I can't see another headline about this. Which sources do I believe? Yeah, so sometimes you just have to decide, these are the facts I need to know, and I'm just going to leave it alone now. Because you can get too much information, and it actually just starts to increase your worry. And also, again, if it's going on in places you can't do anything about, that also, again, tends to kind of increase the worry. So, yeah, information overload is the thing. And you know, I am old enough that I remember the days, I don't know how many of you do, when they had an hour of nightly news nationally and maybe a half hour of local news, and that was it. And then you got the paper. So they kind of controlled the news cycle for you. Now it's 24/7 several places. So be mindful of that it doesn't always help to look at it all the time.
I do want to say something because, again, the pandemic is one thing, and we could all talk about that, wearing masks and such. The protests currently that's going on, the social injustice, race is something we don't do well talking about. And if you hadn't guessed, I'm a talker. But I think also too, there are things that we do want to talk about that I would encourage you to find a way, if you want to visit about race, to listen, to hear, to understand, I encourage you to look for that way to do that, because I think by talking is also a stress reliever. It also, again, with your cohort will build closeness. And again, primarily, I think it's a stress reliever for us individually. So it's not something we do well in our society, but I would encourage you to try. Okay.
Yeah, the thing about difficult conversations, they're good to be able to do as long as you can do it respectfully. You don't have to do it well. Okay, we are close to the end of our hour. So I guess if anybody has further questions or comments, please feel free to call the counseling center or email either of us. It's Risa R, and then I'm S Sobel, and then it's @uca.edu. Again, I appreciate all of you taking the time out of your day to stop and listen and contribute. And we hope you all continue to do okay as you're going through, but use your resources and don't be afraid to ask for extra support if you're not doing so okay.
And our student health services are actually seeing patients in the clinic if they're healthy and they could come on in. So they're actually opened up. So if you're here and you need to use them, please feel free to use them as well, okay? Just really quick short story. My husband has 2 hip replacements, and that's where I learned the difference between an OT and PT. And OT and PT, you guys were fantastic and great, and so really appreciate the work you do. So thank you, and have a great summer, and we keep our fingers crossed for the fall.
Okay, bye everybody.
Thank you, bye.